Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. I am super excited to be joined yet again by Tim White. I haven't spoken to Tim actually for some time because life is crazy, and we've been meaning to get together and do this for a while, and this is the end result. So welcome, Tim. Good to see you again. If you want to reintroduce yourself to the audience that might have come on board with the channel subsequent to our last conversation, and let them know who you are.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Great to be back with you, Jonathan. I'm a journalist who's been covering Ukraine and having worked there initially for years and years and years, even before the first, in fact, as far back as the second revolution. In the first revolution, I actually taught when I was teaching journalism in Kiev, one of the people who became the main spokesman for Yushchenko, who was the guy who was poisoned. You may remember the disfigured face he had during the first attempt to knock him out of the race and then fix the election. Then it was rerun. He became president. Wasn't a very successful tenure, but that's another little claim to fame that I've just revealed that I don't think I've ever let be known online before. And since then, on and off trips to Ukraine, working with training in various facilities, mainly at universities, TV stations and the like. And since the war, obviously, everything has turned to covering that, including now a highly successful, even though I say so myself, daily thread that is used by a lot of people in the industry as well to get their information, which they then build upon.
Yeah, I mean, all my viewers will know I've been doing this now for what, 3 years, something like that, and my daily videos are just jam-packed full of information every single day, to the point where I've got my geopolitics video coming out after this, and I might do a live premiere of it, even though I've recorded it. So just to let the audience know that they can carry on chatting by watching that video afterwards. But that's an hour long. Just so much stuff is going on. But as my audience will know, I use your thread an awful lot. So it is a really useful aggregator of an awful lot that's going on. So, for example, this morning's news of the terrible strikes attack overnight of the 550 Russian drones and missiles on Kiev. You usefully compile it all together for people to be able to synthesize, you synthesize all this information. So, it's a tireless job for you as well.
Yeah, was not much sleep again last night. I can't remember. I had something to do about 1 a.m. when it looked like it might be getting a little quieter, and then came back online about 3. And I think I eventually went to bed about 8 a.m. UK time this morning, and was up again 2 and a bit hours later. So
your sleep hygiene must be screwed, because I look at your threads and I'm like, he was up at that time. You're still up? What's going on?
Yeah, well, maybe you don't know how it is, but you've got to see a job through, and then when the attacks are going on overnight, you have a global audience. I know I have a lot of US interaction, but I think it's still mainly European, and you also know that when people wake up in the morning, they want to know what's happened. I don't want to leave yesterday's thread up. If I've made it to like 3 a.m., sometimes I'll start the next day's thread then, because it gives nice little base for people who search me out. I'm so often hindered or hidden or shadow banned, or whatever you want to call it. Victimized would be as good a word by Twitter, to give it its heritage name that I still like to use. That people actually have to type in my own address. Not so bad on B Sky, where I also am, but I don't show up in people's feeds even when they've asked for notifications when I tweet a lot of the time. And you can tell the figures are up and down: 30,000 one day, 10,000 a couple of days later. So if people type my name in, I like something to be there. It's I won't say it's addiction, but you do feel a compulsion. And every time I feel really tired or feel like I just need sleep, just keep reminding myself of friends I've got out there, and you've seen that, you've been out there as well, who are fighting every single day just to survive. And a picture of Ewan's daughter sleeping in a bathtub last night was a really heart-wrenching moment. And you just have to think how lucky you are, and what's a bit of sleep. Hopefully I can make it up over time, and hopefully one day we'll have freedom and we can all enjoy a nice long lie-in and a good beer together of the craft beers that are on offer in Kiev these days.
Oh, that sounds like a great option. I was talking to Caleb Robertson yesterday on a live stream, and just like talking about how Ukraine really has an opportunity after the war ends to thrust itself onto the world stage in a way that it never could have dreamed of. Like every cloud has a silver lining. The silver lining for Ukraine is everyone knows about Ukraine now. It was a country that wasn't factoring in many people's psyche before the war, but the war, like rather ironically, or rather like annoyingly for Putin, is he wanted to eradicate the Ukrainian identity, and he's done nothing but spotlight it. And there's so much opportunity for you. I'd love to go for an extended visit to Ukraine after the war.
Yeah, it's funny because when people said that initially when I was working in Ukraine, back in 2010, 2012, maybe 2014, when it all kicked off for the first time, really, the people will go, "Oh, is that still part of Russia?" and horrible questions like that, and you had to educate people. But it was nice to be able to educate them. And the only people who really heard of Ukraine or knew anything about it was because of two things: football, Eurovision. Those were the only two things. Whenever people say, "Oh yeah, Ukraine, they're in the finals of Euro, whatever," or "Oh, they won Eurovision, didn't they?"
No. Neither of which feature much with the American audience, of course. So it's like, well, we don't follow football.
Soccer. They're hosting the World Cup. Come on, soccer.
Yeah, so yeah, you're absolutely right though, and it's wonderful that there's such a positive sense of their national pride, the national identity now that it's something that everyone, I think, can safely get on board with. So it's a crazy time at the moment. Last night was a record night for strikes on Kiev. I wonder how many got through and to reach their intended targets. I often talk about what the targets really are, how many of the drones are aimed at military or critical infrastructure, how many are aimed just at civilian infrastructure, and of course what goes up must come down. So even if you intercept like 70, 80, 90% of the drones, those drones are falling down. If it's over urban areas, they're falling down over urban areas. What's your sense of last night's attack, and how well do you think the Ukrainians did in intercepting them?
Well, right. First of all, you're talking about pride and national pride and things. I do want to say Happy Independence Day, 4th of July, for anyone who's up very early, breakfast time over in the West Coast, and nice mid-morning coffee I hope you're joining us with if you're on the East Coast. So to answer your question, Jonathan, I was skeptical, shall I say, kind of like live in running when the missiles started to join the drones, that all the damage done, and Klitschko, the mayor, the former world heavyweight boxing champion, had put it all down to drone debris. Now, Kiev has, as you would expect for a capital city, the best air defense. They're still stocked pretty well. Other places really are struggling, and their soft targets are being hit more and more regularly. So whether Kiev did have an outstanding night and did really well, and some of the other places dragged the average down or not, or whether it's the fog of war, because we are still, Ukraine is as honest, I think, as any nation I've known in a war with its information right now. It doesn't particularly hide stuff. It doesn't broadcast things, but things do get out. And they are confirmed fairly quickly, like with the training ground attacks, which are inevitable. They're a horrible consequence of war. But especially when you've got drones in the sky and satellites, it's quite easy to spot things these days, as we've seen all too well in Iran, where the US has tried to pretend it obliterated, and we can see little men running around near former or maybe even still current nuclear sites. So to get back to your point, it's very difficult. We have the statistics given. I would tend to suggest that I think they are accurate, because we look at the missiles, and very few missiles got taken down. They didn't intercept the Kinjal this time. The hypersonic, the dagger is the Western phrase for it. And they didn't take down the ballistics by and large, just a couple of other missiles as well. So that would tend to suggest, well, if they're honest about that, why aren't they honest about the drones? So I think they are. And as you say, when they are coming from greater heights as well and dive bombing in at higher speeds, as the new designs are now, there is going to be a lot of damage wherever it falls, even if it doesn't explode. Just hitting a roof will make a huge problem, likely start a fire as well. So you just hope that the debris lands away from inhabited areas. But when you have to protect a city, that's not always easy. You can see in Moscow, of course, they ring the city with air defense. They try to do that in Kiev as well, which is why we hear about shoot downs, particularly in the Borispil area to the east of Ukraine, where the drones come from. Yeah, and Fastiv in the south. It's another area that's often on the news where debris can fall. So it's just not possible to take down all of them all the time, especially when they can fly at much higher altitudes now, almost out of reach until they start their dive bomb. And then you've got to have air defense in the city. So I think Kiev air defense did a really good job. There'll be some questions why this time they couldn't intercept as many missiles. They're always learning. They did at one point see a real dip in just the data, just the number of percentage-wise drones being taken down, missiles being taken down. And there was a real problem. There was a lot of criticism within the Ukrainian army, Ukrainian reporters embedded with various sections on the front line, that air defense specialists were being sent to the front line to plug gaps. That was a real retrograde step. And I know that has happened from my own experience. I've been told that has happened, and that has been reversed now, as far as I'm aware. So we do have the specialists back where they should be. The guys are the most experienced to save other people on the ground, civilians as well as guys in uniform.
Yeah, I think the recent dip in numbers I put down to, so we were having like 90, 95%, even 100% for some time interception rates. And then they suddenly precipitously dropped. And part of that, as far as I can work out, is down to the strikes taking place at Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, Konstantinivka, where you've got this semicircle of cities that are really right next to the contact line. And when you've got a drone, so we've got a drone flying to Lviv or Kiev, right? You've got 7 hours to take it down, 3 hours to take it down if it's not one of the jet ones. Whereas if it's flying at like 20 kilometers behind a contact line, you've got to take it down immediately, and your air defense has to be in drone and artillery range in order to do so. So, you know, it's really difficult. And there was a time I think the Russians were focusing on taking out those frontline towns, and that's really hard for the Ukrainians.
Yeah, absolutely. It does depend where they are sent. They don't give specific breakdowns for all the regions, so it would just take too long to analyze, I think. So you're absolutely right. It does get skewed if you're aiming at the frontline areas where there is much less air defense, where it isn't covering towns and cities particularly. You're going to see far fewer of them being brought down. But I think by and large air defense has improved, but it's an ongoing battle. You know, we see innovations in drones from both sides. The Russians actually, I think, probably moved ahead from a very poor start in terms of not realizing just how important drones would be. But they marched ahead. And I think one of the biggest problems that Ukraine has faced recently has been like the tethered drones. For those of you may have seen some pictures of just how many wires now scatter around forests. They look like spiders' webs and things. And it's horrible for the nature, for the well-being. You dread to think what it's doing to animals. But it's modern warfare, and they really stole a march doing that. And Ukraine's technology has had to catch up, and now we've seen some new innovations where maybe Ukrainians are getting back on top again in terms of not only drones, but the hybrid drone missiles as well, which I think are just starting to be used and to be felt on the battlefield.
Yeah, so you've got these Peklo drones, which is hell in English, and a number of other ones. You're starting to see evidence of them using them. What's your belief? Because again, something Caleb was saying last night, and I hope this is true, but he had a sense that the US, to be fair, sorry, I'm interrupting myself. The US appear to have been putting pressure on Ukraine not to strike deep into Russia with drone and missile attacks. And interestingly, when Lukashenko was speaking to the special envoy Keith Kellogg recently in Minsk, Lukashenko reported to the press that Keith Kellogg had agreed to put pressure on Ukraine to not strike deep into Russia so that a ceasefire could take place. So there appears to be evidence that the US has been putting pressure on Ukraine to stop striking deep. Now, if this telephone call that's just taken place, and we don't know what the telephone call between Zelensky and Trump has been, that's finished, but we don't know anything about it yet. Can you foresee a situation whereby Ukraine is just going to say, right, bugger this, we are just going to be unshackled now and start hammering? Because they hit an electric substation in Moscow Oblast, and so you get a sense that they could just start really hammering Russia in ways that we haven't seen for some time.
Yeah, I think they hit two actually, Jonathan. Another one in Vladimir, which is quite near Moscow as well. And we've seen a couple of oil targets hit again, depots rather than refineries. But important, particularly for the military, for the logistics of keeping all their gear going. So to answer your question, although it seems on the face of it, with the criticism that I'm giving, you are, and various others are giving of the Americans, there is still a lot they are giving in terms of the intelligence, in terms of the use of the satellites, in terms of the aircraft that they have a controlling interest, if you like, in NATO. So it is going to be very difficult, and life could become a lot worse still if Ukraine really upsets the US. So although they are not doing anywhere near enough, and they didn't do enough under Biden, and they didn't hold what was basically an oath to protect Ukraine from Obama's day in 2014, when Crimea was invaded, we still need America on side. It's almost like getting half your pocket money instead of the full amount. You feel aggrieved, but if you argue too much with your parents, you'll end up getting nothing. And there is still a lot that we need from the US, even if they're doing basically a Turkey and an India and a China trying to play both sides at the moment, it appears.
Yeah, I think I broadly agree with that. I mean, you can see that it's very easy for us in the kind of internet community and the pro-Ukrainian community to sit here and excoriate Trump and his administration for doing X, Y, and Z, and say, why don't Europe just stand up on our own two legs and do X, Y, and Z? But actually, the reality is that Europe needs Trump, and if you push Trump away, then Trump becomes more overtly your enemy, and you're pushing him into the arms of Russia. But certainly in terms of like trade wars and everything like that, Trump becomes even more of an enemy. And so you can understand why there's this consistent approach from European leaders to just keep him on side, to stroke his ego as much as possible. And that's really frustrating for us, because, you know, it's not like objectively, it's not like intuitively the right thing to do, but it could be that that's the only choice. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And I've been critical too of the lack of backbone of various US politicians. I mean, is it even legal when you've had Congress, senators voting, and this tranche of money and these weapons have been already promised, already budgeted for, accounted for? They're in Poland. They're about to cross the border. Is it legal for a president to then just say, nope, stop those, and bring them back, whether it be an Undersecretary of Defense in the US Ministry of Defense, or whether it be Trump himself? Who can make those decisions against Congress? The president is all conquering. He likes to think he's the king. But we must remember, for those of us not familiar with the US system, it's supposed to be three equal parties in the judiciary and the houses of democracy in the US, and the president as well. The president doesn't rule everything, but obviously has the biggest say as an individual in what happens. But where is the backbone of the likes of the Ukraine supporters we were seeing, the very outspoken Senator Lindsey Graham? How can he allow this to happen? His sanctions bill's being watered down. He gets all the publicity and all the praise when he goes to Kiev and says this will happen. It's a bipartisan, and then nothing has come of it. Still weeks later, and what are we now? We're about, I think we're approaching 120 days, is it, since Ukraine agreed to the ceasefire Trump announced that they had to agree to, or there'd be severe punishment, and there's been no backlash against Putin, again and again and again. And so, yeah, I think Ukraine is now well within its rights to say, hold on, we held up our bargain, we still want to work with you, but we have to protect our people. And by doing that, or the best way to do it, one of the best ways to do it, is to strike these places. We're really appreciative of the help you are giving in the terms of the intelligence, particularly the satellites that you give us access to. But we have to do this to save our people. And if you're not going to be on board with it, I'm sorry about that. But my real gripe, we knew what the president, we knew what his sycophants who were just clinging to his coattails for a little taste of power, like his vice president, who's turned 180 degrees, as Rubio likewise. But the people in Congress, just grow a spine. What you believe in, what you voted for, you're just happy now to just turn your back on everything. You know, for all the criticism of Elon Musk, at least he stuck to his guns over this one.
Yeah,
and let's see what happens now if he does start supporting opponents of those who push through this bill. Because the real hope for Ukraine now, the real hope for Russia was Trump's election. The real hope for Ukraine now is looking at the midterms already next year, because it doesn't look like the war will be over anywhere near by then.
Yeah, there's so many interesting things to talk about there. Just to dwell a tiny bit on US politics, and sorry to the audience that gets bored of me doing this, but it's really interesting for the big beautiful bill going through the House of Representatives. So it passed a procedural bill, obstacle, and then it got sort of voted on, and there were supposedly 14 Republican representatives that were going to vote it down, and they then met with and got spoken to by Donald Trump, and they switched like that. And there are lots of people saying, hang on, how did these supposedly principled people suddenly do a 180? And the information coming out now is literally he offered them signed hats and T-shirts and memorabilia, and that's literally in one of the news reports out now, is that's what flipped some of them. Oh, I got some signed Donald Trump. Where are your freaking principles? But yeah, just so like there seems to be the ability to put all this pressure on these people. People don't get to vote with their conscience, which is worrying from an authoritarian point of view. But going back to the decision to halt the aid, I understand that the Elbridge Colby was very heavily involved, and then Pete Hegseth would have had to sign it off. But there's this argument, and I subscribe to this, that Trump didn't know about that in the same way he didn't know about much of the big beautiful bill, his big signature piece. Then his question on it shows that he's got no knowledge of it, and then we hear leaks saying that actually he didn't know anything. It didn't know it had cuts to Medicaid and all sorts. And so I think he's a bit of a figurehead where people are underneath. Like Pete Hegseth stopped aid to Ukraine for that time previously because he misinterpreted something Trump said, but Trump didn't know about that. I don't think Trump knew about this aid. Anyway, just my rambling.
Well, I'm sure it would have been in one of the dispatch boxes, as we call them in the UK. I'm sure it would have been in one of his intel briefings, but he doesn't read them unless someone reads them out and slowly and says, hey, wake up, President, this is what you need to listen to. He ain't going to know about it or even what it means, I would think. And that's not being disrespectful, although I can be. It's just I think it's the truth. I just don't think he's bothered with the minutiae.
Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, the claim is that he, up until recently, had access. He'd received 14 intelligence briefings since the inauguration in the same time period that Joe Biden had received 90 intelligence briefings. So, like, the guy is just not hearing stuff. And then the question is, well, who tells him? How does he get any information? And it's just what people around him feed him, and the people around him, they're your problem. You know, that's who you need to get to convince to help Ukraine.
Yeah, it's the last person in the room that a few people have commented on, even from his first presidency, wasn't it? That can just change his mind. We saw in the Vatican when he was one-on-one with Zelensky in that famous shot. And then there were others from European leaders speaking to him one-on-one. And then when he got back home a few days later, he accused Ukraine of starting the war again, having been very conciliatory. So it is... whoever's got his ear at that particular moment has to make the headway. And you can understand, going back to the point of, I hate to see it now, I guess that Macron and Starmer hate doing it, but they do feel the only way to have time in the room and to get your point heard and just to throw in a couple of little lingering bits is to suck up to him, to be nice to him, to massage his huge ego and just try to get heard.
So, you know, I was talking about this morning about how there are some people starting to peel away from that. I was, you know, I was looking at what Gustav Gressel, who's an Austrian military person, does security policy in Europe, just basically saying we need to smack the American mule hard now. We need to, like, so there are some people, but again, it's whether the leaders do this. It's this a constant argument that we've already had in this video, that do you reject the US very publicly and openly and try and reprimand them to doing the right thing, or will that be completely counterproductive? And you're just stuck in this cycle of sucking up and sucking up and sucking up, and then it having no effect, but there's no other option, because if you don't suck up, then it's even worse. It's like the least worst option.
Yeah, at the moment, I still think we have to play that game, but we have to try to appeal to people's conscience. You know, and in some respects, the whole NATO thing, he thinks he's got to win there. And the 5% figure, it is good. And there were nations, and there still are nations that aren't contributing enough. And that cannot be fair. But I did point out that most of the defense industry of NATO is based in the US. And so the US gets an awful lot of that money back, which Trump and his cohorts know full well. It's just very easy to say everyone needs to spend 5%. But at least it seems like there's an agreement now that any defense spending, therefore that goes towards the Ukraine aid will be allowed to be able to count as well. But there are loopholes that are
huge
important things, but I think it is important. And speaking as a British citizen, we were way underprepared as supposedly one of the leading lights. We cut and cut and cut. And it's very important that we do up our defence spending now, because of all the other things that sacrificed. We might not have any of them if we don't look after ourselves. And the easiest way to do that right now is to prevent the border getting any nearer and to support Ukraine. And therefore, it helps all the Baltic states and all our true allies and Poland as well to the east.
Yeah, and it's good to see a lot of joined up thinking with regard to industry, a lot of decisions on co-producing items. There's an agreement with a British firm, Prevail, who they're going to make drones in the UK, which is interesting because originally there was a lot of talk about localizing production in Ukraine. So making Western goods in Ukraine or Ukrainian goods in Ukraine with Rheinmetall and BAE systems and whatever coming into Ukraine, that kind of localization. Now we're talking reverse localization, where we're building Ukrainian drones in UK and Ukrainian stuff in Denmark. And so which is great because you're spreading out your different facilities. It makes them safer. They're not going to be hit in a war zone, but also it gives you a sense of national security. It gives you jobs at home. So there's lots going on with this marriage of defense and industry. Do you think that how do you feel just in general about the support for Ukraine going forward? Obviously taking America's issues into
Jonathan, I see we've got a load of questions coming in as well. If you want to get a few of those for us whilst I waffle on for the next minute or so. A couple of things. One, I was rather disappointed that we went with the UK, this is, in our spending review, went with US aircraft, because we've seen some of those restrictions. And hopefully there will be no restrictions on the deal that we got, and there'll be no off switch being able to be flicked, because you simply cannot trust the US at the moment as a reliable ally. And that is paramount. What's the point in buying any equipment? So hopefully that has been completely negotiated, and the only time the US will have any controlling interest will be if and when, and hopefully it never happens, when these aircraft are carrying nukes. They are going to be nuclear capable. With regard to helping Ukraine, I do like the integration is the greatest way to help Ukraine grow, to help Ukraine consolidate allies, and in a reverse fashion as well, to help them get into the European Union, which will be huge for their overall security and the growth of society. The understanding of tolerance. Ukraine isn't a completely Western nation now, but it has grown so quickly in that regard. It's far more liberal, far more understanding, and has always been Western looking since I first visited not too long after the fall of communism. In historical terms, it's always known. Everyone has been told, even during communism, of the past that wasn't controlled by Russia, it wasn't controlled by Moscow. Everyone knows that, and it's very much a Western looking society, and that must remain so. The link up where it's a symbiotic relationship really helps as well with the UK and other European nations. Denmark, I think, probably started this, didn't they, to finance production, and as you mentioned, Rheinmetall as well. So it's a horrible thing to say, but we have to put ourselves on at least a semi-war footing, not just the UK, but all member nations of either alliance, the EU or NATO, and make sure the production is really ramped up, because as we've seen, stocks have become way too low in pretty much all our countries, while Russia has been on a war footing for 3 years. And so when initially we said that we're running out of missiles, they were, but they very soon managed to get new missiles despite all the sanctions and the sanctions busting that's gone on. And I think one of the last things I posted before I came into your program today, Jonathan, was a picture of a Chinese component used in the drone attack on Ukraine overnight. So it's another thing that we need to try everything to tighten up, and the US 500% sanctions looked a very good way of doing it, but as usual, a lot of hot air and far too little action, I'm afraid.
Yeah, just to remind people, I'm going to share what you just were referring to. Just to remind people, if you want to get questions to us, it's kind of ask me anything, so please do so. Get your questions in, that would be fabulous. Disappointed, angry, but not in the least surprised to see China supplying Russia parts for its attempted genocide in Ukraine. One drone brought down in Kiev remained intact enough to see one component was made only last week. Interestingly, they've even tracked down the manufacturer of this, so it says it there actually. And so apparently the Ukrainians are going to look into that and obviously apply some pressure. The Chinese are saying formally actually that they're not helping Russia, but at the same time they said, the foreign minister said that yesterday, I think it was, in the South China Morning Post, that we don't want Russia to lose this war, because then the US is going to turn their attention on China. So they literally and then you got China halt. I don't know. It's just like Ukraine is the first port of call for deterring China. Just there you go. Bloody frustrating. But there you go. Right. Thank you very much to Johnny Christensen. Question: I don't know if you know the answer to this. Martin Coulter says, any info on Podilsky district? I have friends there now.
Yeah, Podil's a lovely place. I like to stay there myself. Lectured down there at one of the universities, home of Stop Fake as well. Good friends of mine down there.
Right.
I mean, it's always been such a picturesque. It's the oldest part of Kiev center. If for those who are not aware, it's a little bit lower than in height of where the main street you probably see so often, the Khreshchatyk, is. And it's a lovely part of town to go and have something to eat or drink, preferably when the drones and the bombs aren't falling. A lot of because they're older buildings, a lot of it fell into disrepair, and it was starting to be a go-to place again, and people were starting to speculate, buy up, develop, and of course that stopped pretty much in the war, which is a huge shame. Further out, because it's quite a big area, is Podil. We're talking about the old downtown, the old town of Kiev, but the Podilsky district wider. There have been some targets that Russia has been trying to get. I seriously don't know what they are. They could have been air defense targets or whatever, but they have been hitting apartment blocks there as well, but not as much as in the other districts. The last few attacks, it's mainly been Solomyansky and Shevchenko districts and Sviatoshin districts as well. So hopefully when we do have that beer, I can take you to the craft beers of Podil, because there are a couple in there, a couple of what should we say, unrecognized or unregistered bars that I've had the pleasure of being in once or twice as well. And Martin, would be very good to have you there. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. And I love me some craft beers, so that's an exciting prospect as far as I'm concerned. What are your thoughts on development of weaponry going on at the moment? What is being seen, utilized within each nation, both at the front line and further away? Obviously, you've already mentioned fiber optic drones being an incredibly important part. I did a video the other day of the strikes in Crimea, where we are starting to see an awful lot of very high value equipment getting taken out by FPV drones, taken off from USVs, unmanned surface vehicles, that are piloting near the coastline, and then gives you another 10, 15, 20, 30 kilometers of range from that repeater. And then the most recent one was not just an FPV drone, kamikaze drone, but actually munition IED dropping drones as well. So that's something that Ukrainians have at the moment up their sleeves. What other things are you seeing and hearing about?
Well, there have been a couple in development. I mean, the biggest thing that will probably grab the headlines when it's confirmed is the use of their own long-range weapons. Not as long as the Taurus, for example, probably not as powerful either, but Ukraine's growing exponentially in not only its arms market per se, but also in the distance and the payloads that they can carry. They virtually started from nothing. I mean, in 2014, they didn't really have an army, and it was Poroshenko, like him or loathe him, who turned it around and got them into a disciplined army, which then got on top in 2014. And that necessitated Russia to absolutely send all its troops in to make sure it wasn't wiped out in Donetsk. and that led to the Lviv kettle and a few other horrific episodes, and the shooting down of MH17, of course, as well, which came through Russian equipment, and the anniversary of which is happening very soon. The modern developments, it's best in some respects to keep them under wraps, and it's also worthwhile having a bit of publicity and a bit of that fear factor in advance. So showing that you're testing things is great. Now, Russia's done that with the Oreshnik, but not with any great deal of success as far as I can see. And despite all the threats, they haven't sent it again soon. And I made a pledge to someone in a private message that she then asked if she could post and a tribute to me. And I said, yeah, sure, that Belarus was not getting an Oreshnik missile this year or next year. If he gets anything looking a bit like it, it will just be a decoy, basically a piece of metal but hollow inside. I can't see that functioning. They may be able to send off one Oreshnik missile, but whether they've got the accuracy, whether it'll explode midair or not, which would be a bigger embarrassment, whether one already has done or not, is still speculated by some. I don't think so, but I think they've certainly had a failed launch. I think it was a huge setback to them. But Russia still possesses an awful lot of other weapons, of course, that can do untold amounts of damage. And in the hands of a psychopathic leadership and a genocidal leadership, it's something we all need to be aware of. The interesting part about the drones, the piggyback, call them what you will, it's a fantastic innovation and one that I wouldn't have thought of, but so many things have happened in drone world. It's just incredible the speed at which things have happened. You know, to think that a couple of years ago no one had heard of FPV drones and really imagined the damage that they could do. The hybrid missile and drone technology that's been used with good effect is still developing as well, and the range now is huge, way over 1,000 kilometers, possibly 1,600 kilometers. That's 1,000 miles. And again, just it makes all of Russia now understand, pretty much all of Russia, all the major centers that are closely allied with Moscow, shall we say, potentially at risk. And that's all we need, just that bit of fear factor. Every little bit pushes people towards the edge. The easiest way of ending this war is with a change in Moscow. And the change in Moscow only comes for a change from the people. By defeating them on the battlefield, a complete victory is probably unlikely. A collapse of the economy is much, much more likely, brought about by financial pressures from abroad, but brought about by absolute discontent inside, people protesting on the streets about the price of goods, about the fact that no hospitals have been repaired, that roads haven't been repaired. One astonishing thing that didn't get much publicity outside of just a few online, I think, that I saw, was the head of one of Russia's main banks, Sberbank, saying that a third of all Russians had seen a real decline in their wages, and 1 in 7 had seen more than halving of their wages. I mean, that is staggering. Can you imagine? Look at your street now outside and imagine that 1 in every 7 wage earner had their income halved, at least halved. And every other person on that street has seen wages go down, not even go up, and inflation as well to be accounted for, that they pretend was at 10%, but was nearer 20%, with their mortgages, with their loans being repaid at 20+%. And I still think, and I've said it for 2 years now, the economy is the way to sink Putin, to sink this despotic regime. And what follows, it's a moot point. I don't see any wholesale change, but society could bring about that change. A military defeat won't see a wholesale change, I don't think, but a homegrown, with pressure applied initially on the economy and the sanctions from the West, allied with military defeat and seeing that Russia is a paper tiger, could bring about certainly a quicker change, and hopefully one that produces a much more stable Russia in the future. Because I don't hate all Russians. I hate that those that are obviously taking part. I hate that those who are tacitly approving of it. But there are a lot of good Russians, and unfortunately there is a lot of silent people who didn't do enough in Germany. We can argue in the 1930s, but you know, for those of us sat in ivory towers, for those of us sat very safely in the UK, Germany, France, or the US, would we really risk our homes, our lives, our businesses to stand on a front line to protest about something? Not all of us would, and we should remember that, and we should try to give Russia the benefit of the doubt for those who bring about change, particularly.
Yeah,
and I hope that happens.
I've talked about that before, actually. That, you know, it's one thing saying what we say from the safety of our own homes, but, you know, if you go out and protest against a war, then that's you in a gulag. And if you've got dependents and a house where it requires your income, and you've got, you know, a partner that's dependent on you and children, and you're suddenly in a gulag for 10 years, then, you know, it's easier said than done, right? It's easier to say, you know, where are these Russians standing up? And they did at the beginning of the war, and then loads of them got, you know, punished for it. And yeah, it's a difficult one. That going back to the weapons, I've been saying for years that the Ukrainians need to be building low to medium cost long range weapons, ballistic, ideally ballistic and cruise missiles, and we're just not seeing them even yet. Now that's because actually 2.5 years of development and from scratch is amazingly quick to get something to fruition. And actually the Hrim 2 is this potential solution, maybe the long Neptune. So there are these supposed missiles that you just have, they use them, never quite sure how many of them do they have, are they going to get lots? I'm just really hoping, I mean, it sounds too bellicose and warmongery, but I'm just really hoping that they're going to produce the crap out of some Hrim 2s and just blitz some Russian targets, because it needs to happen. You win. If you're right, it's all about the economy. I think that's how you win the war. The military stuff would follow after a collapse, an economic collapse. But you know, the other thing you do is, if you don't have the soldiers, you don't have the population, you've got to win from a distance. You've got to trip from a distance. That's why the Ukrainians are using drones, but they then need the missiles and the aviation and all those things that can blow up Russian targets from a distance.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything you say there, I would completely agree with. It's a horrible thing to say, and I've been reflecting on this recently as well, that that terrorism that Russia uses. But we look at how the Second World War ended, and it was, I guess, through terror. It was the US using an atomic bomb that killed unknown amounts of people. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm sure there's been pretty accurate estimates, but and the bad side of me does sometimes think, you know what, if there was one big missile that crashed into one of their tower blocks, like they are doing repeatedly, would that change people's minds? It would cause more hatred, and it would probably cause more patriotism in the short term. But that fear would be there, that people aren't experiencing in Moscow and St. Petersburg still. Now, I don't countenance that. I feel bad for thinking it and saying it, but that's a situation that I've kind of been forced into by seeing damage being done to a country I love by people I know and love suffering. But I think that hitting targets, military targets, very close to people does have an effect. It must have an effect. And surely when they're stood there filming, knowing full well that they're not going to be a target themselves, that this drone passing over their heads isn't going to go anywhere near them because there's a factory just over there and I can film it all here, even though they're told not to, they must know that Ukraine is not hitting civilians, that Ukraine is playing by the rules. Now, whether they think that Russia is or not is a different matter, but there's still that worry, I think, that, oh, something may be shot down. And I think people in Russia are pretty well aware that the Pantsir system has a few, shall we say, less than successful outings and has been known to shoot their own tower blocks, one of which was pretty much admitted recently as well.
I remember seeing when Belgorod was getting a lot of talk. They had S-300s behind Belgorod and Pantsirs. There were air defense. There was one famous picture of an air defense missile lodged in the side of an apartment block. And you're like, yeah, that is definitely a Russian air defense missile. That ain't the Ukrainians.
Yeah, and direction of travel as well was pretty easy to see as well. So, the people inside Russia are one of the main axis of change, and trying to influence them either by letting them know more and more that Russia isn't winning the war, by sending the body bags home, by Russia having to acknowledge this on an ongoing basis with no end to the war, with Russia refusing to even countenance discussions, even though it is pretending. That is going to be a really big way of being able to change things inside Russia. And it might only be a few at a time, but if you can convince 10% more people than last month, that soon grows. And then when you can pound 10% on 10% every month, you will get a sizable number in the end, and people will start having the courage to go out to memorials. We saw what happened with Navalny a long time ago now, and people defying orders to go to his grave and to go to the service. And there is still that huge underswell of dissatisfaction with the regime, with Putin. And they won't tell pollsters this because they don't know whether they're genuine or whether they're going to get locked up or lose their job. But a revolution would not be entirely unpopular now in Russia. And I've never said that before. And I've always said that Putin was elected democratically and fairly, massaged the results quite a bit, especially in some areas where Yabloko was popular, the opposition movement, and Navalny, of course, as well. And so they do everything to ensure the elections are rigged entirely in their favor. But Putin was always hugely popular, particularly in the provinces. And now I think less so. I don't think that if there was a vote tomorrow that he'd be ousted, because people would fear voting for an opponent would get them jailed or whatever. But if the opportunity presents itself to have street protests, to protest against house price collapse, to protest against rents going up, protest about the value of the ruble sinking ever further, no imports of products they like, all the middle class things that are affecting people's lives adversely day to day, and their sons and their daughters and their friends coming home in body bags, then we will see change, whether China likes it or not. The problem being that we're on a finite number of time. There are a finite number of Ukrainian soldiers. And if we can't support and protect the people of Ukraine, the frontline soldiers especially, then Russia is going to win the war. And we're going to settle on awful terms that don't even bear thinking about, that will result in the loss of any sort of freedom for Ukraine, one would imagine. And also directly put at line NATO with an army that has won a war and is battle hardened and has contempt for human life, will throw 1 million souls at Poland if it wants to invade. And what can Poland do about that? It's a frightening prospect.
Yeah, I think, you know, there are so many indicators that are now just every day further indicators that the Russian economy is in a lot of trouble. And, you know, we were talking at the beginning of the war that Russia are going to be playing the long game, but they clearly are, and they have to. But it's almost as if, like, you know, there's always this joke that Putin is a master strategist. So Darth Putin, a kind of satirical Twitter handle, was always like, I ends it with "I am the master strategist" when Putin does something ridiculous. But actually, there is some sense to his master strategy of playing the long game, because at the moment the US is doing exactly what he would want them to be doing, given you know where they've come from and who they are. It's just incredible that the long game is working out. Just talking about a couple of things. First of all, I'm just going to go through the readout for the conversation between Zelensky and Trump. But before I get there, there's this that might be interesting. So several Gerbers, so these are the Gerber, the another type of Russian drone similar to the Shahid, with cameras, CRPA antenna, and a radio modem, were shot down over Kiev. Gerber in Kiev means that there is a radio repeater somewhere nearby. So the video transmission 300 kilometers to Russia is unrealistic, and even 100 kilometers to Belarus is unlikely at this range. So that's interesting. There's a theory that they must be using repeaters located somewhere in Ukraine to be able to bounce that signal back to Russia. So there's something to think about. And then here we have President Zelensky about his phone conversation with President Trump. Quote, "Today we discussed the current situation, including Russian airstrikes and the border frontline developments. President Trump is very well informed, and I thank him for his attention to Ukraine." So that's interesting, claiming that he's very well informed, something that I just wasn't admitting to earlier. "We spoke about opportunities in air defense and agreed that we will work together to strengthen protection of our skies. We have also agreed to a meeting between our teams. We had a detailed conversation about defense industry capabilities and joint production." So interestingly, he signed a deal with an American drone company the other day for co-production. That could be the way in to use the economic approach. We are ready for direct projects with the USA and believe this is critically important for security, especially when it comes to drones and related technologies, just what I was saying. We also touch on mutual procurement and investment. Finally, we exchange views on the diplomatic situation and joint work with the US and other partners. So I don't know that it gives us anything other than, hey, we're going to work together.
Yeah, which you could say, well, they'd already signed that deal, hadn't they, to work together? They'd already committed to that, so it has to go on. Nothing on Truth Social either yet. I've just checked King Donald's stream, and nothing to add to that. So it's a political wording that is necessary, I think, after that to try to ensure that that the US is still on side, and try to say thank you many times so even Pete Hegseth can see that Ukraine is still very, very grateful. It doesn't advance anything there as far as I can see. Some people have written in the comments I've seen as well today about what Trump said yesterday, that I put a clip out of him saying that there was no progress made at all when asked about Russia. Why there wasn't a follow-up, or why he isn't following up with, we're going to have to do something about it, and not in 2 weeks, but now they've had their chances. One can still speculate. But
well, he said
clearly,
straight afterwards that it's so important to see where his brain goes. So when he was saying that, the first half of that sort of 30 seconds was terrible conversation, as in nothing, no improvement, blah, blah, blah. This war is Biden's fault. So he pivoted straight from the opportunity to go hard on Putin to saying, well, the war's Biden's fault, and then blaming Biden for immigration and stuff like that. You're like, okay, so that's the end of his thoughts about Putin. There's just no desire to hold Putin to account.
And also during the phone conversation itself, oh, so you're not moving on that. Surely Ukraine would have been fairly near the top of the agenda. I assume Iran possibly was even higher, because Trump will have liked to have instigated that. And then yet you still go on to discuss future opportunities of working together and cooperation in space. It's like, do you have any priorities? Do you have any morals? There are people dying because of your conversation, because of your lack of inaction, and you are still not punishing Russia. I mean, whatever about the reallocation of weapons, the US is still helping Ukraine, as we've already spoken about, in certain ways that some people forget. But the fact is, there has been no punishment of Russia for making him look an idiot, an incompetent, impotent for 4 months now, in a war that he said he'd finish in 24 hours. And because of his great relations with Putin, and he totally understands him, and he gets me, and all this nonsense. And he's made a pig's ear of it, far, far worse than Biden, of whom I was not equally critical, but I was also critical of. But what's gone is gone. We've got to look to the future. We can only affect things.
Yeah, but one way of affecting the future, if I was a politician in America, or a foreign politician, or any kind of entity that wanted to affect change, I would be taking the approach that Trump is weak, Trump is manipulated. You want to embarrass Trump in showing that he's weak in the face of Putin, that Putin can manipulate you. Oh, you're just a lapdog of Putin. And then you get Trump really angry, and then he pushes back against that, because he doesn't want to be seen as that person. He wants to.
That's why I used the word impotent. Sorry to interrupt. That's why I used the word impotent. I think that's a machismo word that would really make him feel angry, annoyed, and impotent, and he'll be desperate to prove that he isn't. The two things, the one thing he needs to be is talked about and to be important, and the one thing he will despise is being called a coward or being called impotent. So I'm all for using those words when they are justified, and they've certainly been justified, particularly in the last month, when it's just clear that he has no intention, he has no stomach for punishing Russia at all.
Yeah, 100%. When we were talking about drones earlier, and I was just looking on your feed, I can't remember. I was looking at this somewhere else, but I think you mentioned it's on your feed, and I think I did see it. An underwater drone. Was that from today? Oh, here it is. I've got it. Here's one. Right.
Forbes, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's something I originally posted that Forbes then picked up on. The author contacted me to ask more about it. I couldn't provide him any more about it, but he tracked it down and did a very good piece on it. It's well worth reading the Forbes article. But just one of those other innovations that has come about, drones. As
try and find the actual video, because I've seen the video. But yeah, carry on.
Drones, we've known they could land in water, or
here it is.
We weren't too sure whether they could take off in water. We'd seen demos, but this is the first time we've seen it in action. It's there's a bit of notation that comes up on screen which helps us to show you where the drone is, this where they're going to strike, and logs. These are just 3 logs, a temporary bridge, and from the site of the FPV drone, it's been blown up. Now, as the author says, why have they just chosen to blow up 3 logs? Was this a test? But it certainly proves that damage can be done. One good point is that even when they're sitting stationary, if you put them in and land them secretly, which you could do, and if you have 100 of these things, all with a small payload, and you get them all around, for instance, the one of the structures, the Crimea Bridge, without being detected, that's an awful lot of damage you could do. But A, you've got to make sure they don't get detected, and on a crossing like this, it's highly likely that you could do that. But secondly, in a bigger structure, more difficult. But also, they continue to use battery while they are there, still receiving a signal, still waiting for instructions. So in this case, the speculation was, well, maybe it was going to run out of battery. Maybe they're expecting a crossing of some equipment, some Russian army personnel. And so they had to explode it then, or just lose it because it would die, and the technology could get into the opponent's hands as well. So there's all sorts of reasons why, but it's good because it shows what can be done now. It's another little thing that the Russians have to be wary of, and that's something else that Ukraine has in its armor.
It looks to me like this is a drone, an aerial drone, right? Those propellers.
Yes, it's a drone that can withstand and operate in water, can still receive signals clearly because it's been sent up to the surface to explode at a given moment, can take off from water, can land in water, and obviously everything is protected from the water, as has been proven. It was proven in tests, but using it in combat.
Yeah, because I saw a video, I don't know how long ago, I'm going to say a year ago, but I don't know whether it was, of a drone being lowered into a sort of test pool of water. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting. Don't know what you'd use that for. Turns out that's what you'd use it for, for landing it in the water and then exploding something from underneath also, you know.
Yeah, so you can imagine if this was a bigger bridge and a really crucial crossing, and there was a lot of equipment going over at a certain point, like we see with trains and trying to sabotage them, how useful that could be if you can get 4 or 5 charges to go off at the same time. And checking every single bridge, every single river, every single crossing would waste so much time for Russia, and they probably wouldn't be successful even then. But it's a nice little neat addition to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going through to see if there are any questions there. Thank you very much to Mal. Really appreciate it. Great live stream. Good to see 2 night owls getting together. Slava Ukraini. Absolutely. Thank you to Kevin Forst and to Michael Vuchar, who just said earlier on, that's bad sinology, talking about views on China. I wasn't giving any analysis. I was just reporting what the foreign minister said. But yes. So I'm going to have a look through some of the other questions. Are there any other aspects to the war that have taken place over the last week or so that you think are significant for dissecting?
I think we kind of touched on earlier, talking about long-range strikes. I think taking out of senior personnel, one of which clearly didn't happen, that was written about, one of which we're not sure has happened, but 2 others have happened. And the fact that Russia is admitting these more quickly rather than hiding as well now is interesting. And that tends to me to suggest that Russia now feels okay to talk about it being a war, not just a special military operation where no one gets hurt and they just put Ukraine in their place. And I think they realize that the public now is so deep into this that they hate Ukraine enough to just say, okay, we will suffer a few casualties. But when their own body bags, as I said, start coming back in huge numbers again, and when they start, because they haven't got enough new recruits, knocking on the doors and having to have another round of recruitment among the young, then that is when it could all kick off again, because they pushed that very close earlier in the early days of the war, when we saw a lot of people flee Russia. And the other big problem that they have is with their demographics, of course, looking ahead, because the country isn't going to get out of its economic stupor with the current prevailing conditions, and with having very few able male workers, and also just reproducing the population is proving to be more than a struggle, with people still emigrating the country and not immigrating. Whether when the war ends people will come back or not probably depends upon the regime, because if the same regime's in place, if you've escaped to Georgia or Kazakhstan or further afield, don't think you'd be wanting to go back there in a hurry, as a few have found their cost already. And taking out big targets allied on the battlefield, allied to the targets like inside Russia of generals and high-ranking officers who've just been retired or away from the front line, with the long-time mayor of Luhansk as well. Again, will just add to that fear factor and just prove to people, ordinary Russians, that anyone who does bad could yet be targeted and could be taken out. So I think that's probably the biggest development strategically in terms of Ukraine's advancement, has been the number of successful high-profile hits they've had in the last month, Jonathan.
Just incredible that you take out the acting commander of the Black Sea Fleet and then the deputy commander of the Russian Navy, just in the space of 24 hours, pretty much. One in Koronovo, one down in Sevastopol. And then that's on the back of the Black Sea Fleet commander having been killed in Sevastopol previously. And yeah, I wonder whether, and I'm sure they have, people keep saying that there's more from where that came from in terms of Operation Spiderweb. That you're looking forward to Ukraine seeing what they've got in terms of some kind of long planned. I mean, goodness me, there are going to be so many movies, so many films made of what's taking place in the war in Ukraine after the war finishes. Just
yeah, it's. I mean, there are already quite a few being made, aren't there? And some of the things that you mentioned, Kellen, earlier, really good stuff that he's doing as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing Sean and Aiden's documentary into prisoner of war and how they're being treated in Ukraine, from two guys who are so badly treated, tortured psychologically and physically in Russia as well. So at the moment, we're getting a few of those, but there will be some probably blockbusters to be made in the future at some point as well. We can dream of that day, because it will mean that we will have peace at last, but hopefully it's a peace on the correct terms.
Yeah, as Viggo Holmson said, all of Ukraine's recent developments on the weapons front will feed into Russians' paranoia big time. What did General Hodges say? All the generals will have eyes in the back of their heads for years to come. Absolutely. Yeah, I just want to just pick up a comment. I don't know if this is someone who's a little bit trollish or whatever. Often, we had, what was it, Trevor for ages as a bit of a troll, who had that same color avatar representing pro-trans, but actually was pro-Russian. And it's, you get in there with these different viewpoints. Anyway, this person says, we're, as in the US, we're not the world's police force. Europe has to step up to supply Ukraine. We need to help protect Israel right now. So let's forget Israel. But the idea that the US is the world's police force, or is seen as that. I used to think this, and I remember watching Team America World Police, where they riffed on the whole idea that the US goes around the world sorting out these different conflicts from a moral point of view. But that's never what happens. Like, the US gets involved for strategic reasons, for their own benefit. And the frustration about Ukraine is it's to US's benefit to help in Ukraine. This isn't about morality. It aligns with morality as well, which is really lucky, because many other times the US gets involved, it doesn't align with morality, but it is to do with strategic interests. So the weapons of mass destruction was about oil contracts in Iraq, and getting involved in Libya as well, and Syria, and all of these places have particular geopolitical strategies in mind. I will take I always use the example of, why did we not get rid of Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe? Well, the reason is because Zimbabwe didn't have anything that the West particularly wanted in terms of natural resources. And I will take Antifa Carl's point about the US being the world police, and I will raise it at General Smedley Butler. So this is one of my favorite quotes of all time to give an idea of what our armed forces, not just the American armed forces, the reason why our UK armed forces are patrolling the Somali coastline for pirates is to ease the trade routes so that our economies can still make money, right? And that's then good for tax and then allows us to spend money. So this quote is the single most important quote, and this is from when was it he wrote this? I don't know, 1930 or 1930, no, 1930 or something like that. I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period I spent most of my time as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. So this is a guy who was in the armed forces, in the US armed forces. Thus, I helped make Mexico and especially Tampico safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1902 to 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for American fruit companies in 1903. In China in 1927, I helped to see that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Our boys were sent off to die with beautiful ideals painted in front of them. No one told them that dollars and cents were like the reason they were marching off to kill and die. And the end part to that quote, which is not there, which is to do with Al Capone thought he was big in like 3 districts. I was working on like 5 continents or something like that. So it's the idea that the US doesn't go into wars for moral, world policing reasons. That's kind of how we see it and how the press might see it. They go into conflicts because there's a return on investment in so doing. End of.
Yeah, there has to be a certain amount of that, doesn't there? And whether you say that there are some altruistic reasons behind that, and whether it's like a scale, if persecution becomes too bad. I mean, did NATO go into Yugoslavia for really altruistic good reasons, or was there an underlying financial reason? I don't think there was in that case.
But NATO, I think, is marginally a bit different. So there you have something that is more approaching world order police force type thing, though not 100% necessarily, but I think more so.
But I understand that, and I even understand, really I do, why people voted for Trump. And I was in the US last year for a little while, had a couple of meetings, had a nice drive around in places which were, I thought, going to be Democrat forever, and seeing so many huge Trump signs and talking to people who just assumed I was a Trump supporter because I was British, which was pretty strange.
Wow.
And just seeing this huge shift. Now, there are a number of factors that I've gone over in the past, but a lot of it is to do with the economy. They thought, for better or worse, that there was a great businessman who would obviously become a great president for the second time and be able to do exactly what he wants and make everyone rich. Obviously, it's not turning out that way unless you're rich already or get a little bit more rich, potentially. But you're right about the transactional basis. How important is it to keep inflation in check, to keep the nice goods coming to your country at a reasonable price, rather than having to miss out on the Strait of Hormuz if Iran closes it or starts a real hot war again there now. That's where I think transactional politics comes into place, actually, to be honest, Jonathan, that you do have to take some decisions and what's worth it and what isn't. But I do try to point out to the reasonable people who like to debate and who are not, what I would call maggots, which I think I got banned from some platform for a type, just meaning Make America Great Again types as a shorthand, not a really derogatory comment, honest gov. That if you do want to debate, then how can you not see that helping Ukraine is a benefit to the US? Obama pretended to help and did nothing. You had a piece of paper, you signed a document for the reasons of future US security and NATO and Europe, and you did nothing. And you thought that would help. And then when Georgia was invaded, Bush this time, just so desperate to stop the war and stop it spreading, not thinking that, well, it'll just be vaguely a temporary ceasefire till they invade somewhere else. They'll be stronger. They'll have a little bit more hardened, battle-hardened troops, a little bit more war experience. And all the time this, oh, no, we must rush to peace. I don't want to fight wars, but I absolutely know that throughout history, if you don't stop wars, they get worse, they get bigger, they get closer to your home, more people die, your standard of living drops, all of these things. And this position we're in now should never have come to pass. And at least David Cameron recognises that and says they made a mistake in 2014, the former UK Prime Minister, for those who don't know. And still, Obama says that he did nothing wrong. Even Biden has admitted they should have been tougher. A few pathetic sanctions and virtually no support. One NATO unit, battalion, whatever, into Crimea in 2014, and this would have gone no further. Now, Putin would have scratched around and thought, okay, where can we invade? What can we do next? But it would have put it back at least a generation, I believe. And who knows what might have happened in the meantime. But because we did nothing, 10 years, 8 years later, the hot war really begins across all of Ukraine. And if you think it's going to be another 8 years before another flare-up on a NATO front line, then I'm sorry to disappoint you. You've got another thing coming. It's going to be a lot less because they are still on a war footing. Yeah. And if some sort of peace agreement is achieved and signed that isn't to either party's absolute satisfaction, then you watch. Russia will remain on a war footing at all costs and continue to massively build up their offensive equipment. And we will sit there watching and going, oh, it's great, isn't it? We've achieved peace and Donald will call for his prize. It's just stupidity. Americans, you are consigning your sons, daughters, your grandchildren to potentially a long, long time of poverty and higher taxes because of what is going to be happening in the next 12 months to 24 months in Ukraine and thereafter on the NATO front line.
Just to finish that quote, looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. And I just want to so in response to that, Aussie Bugger says, and I think he's slightly misinterpreted me. I didn't say it's just about resources. It's about geopolitical strategic objectives. So which is not necessarily morality, right? So he says, JP often mentions Zimbabwe. I'd like to know what period he thinks the USA could or should have intervened in. No, I don't think they should or could. Like I'm saying they didn't because it wasn't in their interest to do so. There was nothing to gain from it, either in terms of material resources or geopolitical. It's just not that geopolitically important for the US to have got involved. So given Zimbabwe is landlocked, what strategic interests were at stake when the USA tried to help Somalia? Now, Somalia is interesting. So the US got involved in Somalia initially for humanitarian reasons, Operation Good Hope or something, whatever it was. And then that became a counterterrorism thing. So that's the strategic. And now the first bit was actually humanitarian. That is a little bit of morality, but really the main part was in counterterrorism. And that's why they're still involved there, which is that's what I mean. The return on investment for them, it isn't about natural resources there, but it's about stability and not allowing terrorism to grow and cause global. So Somalia is all very close to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal and trade. And so, there is a bit of both going on.
And also, allies that you don't want to see slip away at the time. It was important for Kenya, I remember as well, having gone there. They were really fearful of Somalian terrorists, the sea trade as well, all sorts of reasons for getting involved there.
Yeah. And last bit, if it's all about resources, it's not all about resources, but it's all about return on investment. So that's sometimes resources and it's sometimes political stability, which will actually affect resources. So trade, for example. So why the British Navy, the Royal Navy is out in, like I say, the Red Sea is because of resources coming to the trade routes. This is why our Navy back in the 1700s and 1600s was patrolling the Atlantic Ocean, is because resources. It was the gold and the spices and everything. Pirates were taking our national interest. I wrote an article on this some years back because I remember speaking to my mate who's in the Royal Navy, quite high up. He was like at the time PA to the Admiral locally in Portsmouth, And it was just fascinating talking to him about what the Royal Navy really does. And actually, when you look at literally the government website saying what our armed forces are for, it's about national interests. And when you start unpicking what it says about national interests, it is about trade and about relationships, which then beget trade, and so on and so forth. So actually what Smedley Butler says there in 19 whatever it was is as true then as it is now. We just dress it up. There's also morality and humanitarian things that we do on the side, but the main things we get involved in are for our geopolitical strategic interests. Anyway, rant over. Sorry.
Just saw a comment from 4:14 p.m. Inocencio Braga. I don't know if you can pull that one up, Jonathan. Europe should be fighting with soldiers alongside the Ukrainians. North Korea has joined Russia. Just like to point out that the US is actually nearer to Russia than either Jonathan or I are at the moment.
Good point.
So depends on which way you look at the map, doesn't it? But yeah, missiles could actually hit the US, potentially West Coast, before they hit us. Just saying.
Yeah. Well, so actually, that's something I wanted to ask you about as we meander towards the end, Tim. North Korea, like I think as soon as North Koreans got involved in the first like 11,000, then maybe 14, 15,000, depending on what numbers you look at, I was like, this is a problem. Some people were dismissive. I remember actually disagreeing with Jake Bro. Jake Bro is like, these would be cannon fodder, don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, cannon fodder you have to deal with. And to kill cannon fodder sounds horrible. To attrit cannon fodder, you will necessarily take losses yourself. And this will allow 15,000 North Koreans will allow 15,000 Russians to do something else somewhere else, right? And so the North Koreans then were a problem. They continue to be a problem. And now if they're going to get 20 to 30,000 more North Koreans, plus maybe 6,000, 1,000 sappers, 5,000 construction workers, then you've got 25,000 North Koreans going to work in Yalabuga drone production facilities. This is North Korea massively supporting Russia in a way that is deeply, deeply concerning. And should have the Ukrainians, and I'm sure they are, very, very worried. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, just that. I mean, even something else I posted about one business leader bragging that the North Koreans were incredibly cheap and worked 12 hours a day for 6 days a week, and how that was so good for business and for their share price. And that will be replicated. You know, they are slaves. They are just pawns. They are nothing more than that. And even cannon fodder, yeah, it is cannon fodder, and as you say, they do need defeating, and also the use of ammunition. And it's not something, thanks to the inertia of allies, particularly the US, that Ukraine has ever had a real surfeit of. At best, it's been stable, with the next month ahead not being an immediate worry. And another side, I'm getting distracted here, but I saw today 2 separate reports saying that Ukraine is now critically low on anti-aircraft defense on part of the front line, and that's one of the reasons why Grom, or new style aerial bomb, managed to hit Kryvyi today, which is 70 to 80 kilometers from any part of the front line. So you know, it does take away ammunition, having to kill these people. It does tie up a lot of your own troops, and as you quite rightly said, it gives a lot of freedom to other troops working on another flank or behind the front. And it ramps up the production in the factories. We know that the manpower can never be equalized. We just have to make sure that Ukraine wins in other ways, and therefore we have to best support how we can. And that is by making sure that, you know, it's nothing that we can do about North Korea. They are a state that is already sanctioned to the hilt. Any country that trades them will supposedly be sanctioned, be breaking UN sanctions. But what we can do is enact those sanctions. The bill that Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham came up with was, in essence, a good one. It targeted the right people with hugely punitive sanctions. But suddenly, tariffs weren't Donald's favorite word anymore for some reason. You can't understand that. Remarkable, isn't it? But North Korea is a huge problem because they are, unfortunately for them, worthless to either the North Korean leadership or to the Russian leadership. They do not give a single kopeck about them. They are just there to perform a task, and that is to make Putin great again, and to fill the factories, the armaments factories in particular, which is a problem for us because they're already spending up to 40% of their gross domestic product on the arms industry, the defence industry, and that's what they admit to. And the other point being, of course, that they might be useless soldiers as some people see it, but they are still soldiers and they are still trained pretty hard. They are likely to be
they've adapted,
more
actually,
disciplined in some respects than even some of our own soldiers who are just not used to battle conditions. And I say some of ours, talking about the Allies, but they should be quite a cohesive unit if controlled correctly and led correctly. Now, that doesn't often happen in Russia. That's still a bit of a shambolic army, as has been exposed time and time again. But yeah, I'm particularly worried about it because we can't do anything about the manpower, which already Russia has a huge advantage in. And one of the reasons why the North Koreans are even more important to Putin right now, of course, is because he doesn't want to have to call on those middle-class societies in the big cities. Yekaterinburg could be a bit of a melting pot, bit of a tinderbox waiting to happen. St. Petersburg, Moscow, of course, itself, where those summonses just don't come. Very few people in middle classes are touched by anything like that. Apart from those who volunteer, and most of the families, the next generation automatically goes into the services, goes to the college, they graduate, they know they're going to be sent to the war, but they're going to be in a more officer position, they would hope. So yeah, manpower, something we're never going to overcome, but we have to use our brains and the means of the Western world and our vastly superior resources in terms of finances, in terms of scientists, in terms of education, in terms of development and GDP, to make sure that it becomes more balanced in Ukraine's favor.
Yeah, and that's you know, what Zelensky was saying when he released that article in the Economist, talking about how innovation needs to be one of the absolute cornerstones of success for Ukraine, and they are trying that out. I mean, they're when you speak to people, there are signs that there are lots of things that Ukraine is working on, and they are innovating. Operation Spiderweb, what we saw recently in Crimea, etc., etc. By the way, when you get back onto posting things, you're going to have to probably look at Shebekino, just over the border in Belgorod. There's a chemical factory very much on fire there.
It's already on my feed, I believe.
Yeah, I think there's just more footage coming out about it. That's bigger. Yeah. And I just wanted to bring you, I've referenced this earlier, it's in Belgorod city, which is when we're talking about the Pantsir, this is a Pantsir air defense missile caught in a building in Belgorod, and that's what I was talking about. It's like, you can't deny that's a Pantsir missile in a building, on the side of a building in Russia. So yeah, the Russians hitting their own. So I don't know if there's any more questions that people have as we sort of meander to the end. I've got one here. When will Germany and the rest of Europe actually follow through on the coalition of the willing? I mean, I'll answer that initially in saying that was all about a ceasefire. And as soon as you have a ceasefire and you've got an agreed upon kind of line in the sand, if you like, then you get your peacekeeping people in, and that's where the coalition of the willing is at. That's what their job would be, to ensure that the ceasefire is adhered to in some meaningful way. But until there's a ceasefire agreement, that's not even going to be, I think, thought about much more. I don't know how far along the agreement to that those nations got, but anyway.
No, it certainly wasn't united. That was a problem. Then it became some partners, and some partners offering some things, but then not troops. And then it all became, oh, there's going to be no air defense. Well, no, then we won't be doing very much at all. It was a nice idea.
They needed a US backstop, didn't they?
They did. Yeah, had there been the US guarantees, it wouldn't have been a problem at all. But it remains a huge problem, and that's the other thing. You know, if you get a ceasefire, Russia has broken all previous ceasefires as well, and Ukraine has transgressed some as well, looking at the previous statements from monitors. But by and large, every time it was Russia never agreed to hand back, agreed, but never handed back control of the border, which it promised to do so from the Minsk talks originally. And the demilitarization was regularly broken as well. Huge issues on both sides regarding those Minsk ceasefires. But each ceasefire was broken, I think, almost exclusively by Russia from memory, and that was independently proven, not just me saying that. And so even if you do get a ceasefire, as we've said, how is it going to be policed, and what will the coalition of the willing be prepared to do? And will that include sending troops? And will it be not NATO-led? Will it just be a Franco-British thing? Will anyone else dare send troops? It's very difficult, and it does involve democracies. And unfortunately, Putin has a huge advantage there as well, because he doesn't have to give a monkeys what any voter says, because he can just change things to his will. But huge street protests, as we've seen from Iraq previously, in the UK and in the US, are the thing that will unsettle and did unsettle Putin, particularly in response to Crimea, when there was a huge street protest, and he was fearful of another Maidan in Moscow, and saw what damage it did there, and that's when he came down hard on the protesters there as well. But the coalition of the willing, there are countries there that are prepared to help, some more than others. Boots on the ground is going to be a difficult one to get past for governments, to get past their own parliaments, to get past their own party, and not to give further fuel to the right wing, which is an ever-present threat now of taking over certain democracies in Europe.
Yeah, she said dodgy things before, and then she said other dodgy things. This is a representative in the US called Anna Paulina Luna, who's a lunatic. I will not vote for more Ukraine funding. Zelensky cancelled elections, constitution. Sources say US weapons are being sold on the black market. That's not true. That's Tucker Carlson. He disrespected our president and VP. No, they disrespected him. They ambushed him in the White House and slagged him off. Billions have been laundered there. No, I want proof. They put American journalists on a blacklist. No, if you're talking about Gonzalo Lira, then you're an idiot. Peace is the only option. That does not happen by giving them more weapons. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. Go away. Sorry, I just had to rant a bit there. A couple of last questions for you. What do we have here? Should we send troops if North Koreans fight on Ukrainian territory? Because, of course, they're fighting in Kursk to defend Russia. It's part of their bilateral agreement that they have, a kind of NATO Article 5 type agreement, but they're not fighting in Ukraine. What do you think might or should happen if they did go into Ukraine?
We've had a couple of reports of them being captured in Ukraine or shot in Ukraine. Now, that hasn't been proven, so we'll have to say it's not true yet. It's a very, very difficult one. What I would want to happen is that there is a coalition of good forces that helps Ukraine win this war in any way. But is there any point putting boots on the ground, which will be ridiculously unpopular in many, many countries, when we're not supplying some of the other things? There are other levers to pull first before we need to go down that route. It almost doesn't make a jot of difference whether it's North Korean troops or Chinese troops or Cuban mercenaries or from Africa or wherever. The fact is they're fighting against Ukraine, and we should be doing more without needing to put troops on the ground. And one other thing, I don't know whether you saw this one from 4:26 p.m. Evan, who I think subscribes to us both, says, why not a fly zone over Ukraine, which links to it, or at least air assets to shoot down Russian missiles. I call for this since the first day of the war, and I couldn't understand why Zelensky did not call for a no-fly zone when it was clear there was going to be an invasion. He knew there was, but he tried to pretend that there wasn't in the hope it wasn't, and to not cause panic and to not see people of military age flee before the war happened. So he didn't want to take what could be seen as provocative action. Some NATO members wouldn't have liked it for sure, but as a sovereign country in charge of sovereign airspace, which was closed anyway, there is no reason to my mind why NATO, at least a submission, a request could not have been made by Ukraine for a no-fly zone. And I maintained that throughout. It was difficult, more difficult as soon as the first Russian planes had come in there. And I had some vehement arguments with some very senior personnel in publishing, calling me an idiot, not knowing what I was doing, that I would start World War III. And it's just absolutely not true. I remain absolutely convinced that had we put a no-fly zone, and had we made it absolutely clear we would do a Turkey, that we would shoot down anything that went into sovereign Ukrainian territory, I'm not sure there would have been an invasion. I'm not sure that
Mm.
Putin would have been able to do it. And I don't think he'd have been able to take widespread action had he flown a couple of aircraft in and they got shut down. I don't think there would have been great retribution by Russia. There never was over Turkey. That was a little test. Unfortunately, we keep failing tests. We didn't put a no-fly zone up, and we didn't react quickly enough or well enough. And we said, go ahead then, you invade, we'll protest, we'll put on a few more sanctions. Oh, we might give a sidewalk. Oh, we might give a tank eventually. Oh, we might give a few more. Too little, too late, all the way through this sodding war. Still time, but we need real leadership, and we need.
Well, yeah. So the last question, last question is pertinent to that. In your opinion, which European country needs to take more of a lead? Germany, Poland? I think Germany are. I think Germany are doing all sorts of stuff at the moment that is really quite admirable in terms of continued support, lots of money, but also lots of. I think Germany are leading at the moment to some degree. I also think the UK are leading. I said this at the end of my video this morning. I've spoken to a number of people. I don't know if Tim, you know, like I know from people I've spoken to that the UK are doing an absolute ton of stuff under the radar in Ukraine, from special forces to all sorts of other things going on. And actually, the UK is a really important ally of Ukraine. I'm not just saying that because I'm British, like whoop-de-doo, but I think there is a kind of lead that the UK has taken to some degree, and it's Tony Radakin, the admiral who's been our point man in Ukraine, has been really important. We are a major ally of Ukraine, so where we might not have maybe given as much aid as another country, there are things that we're doing that are, I think, very, very important, and that's coming from a number of different sources that I've spoken to.
Yeah, also I want to say France as well under the radar doing quite a lot, but you know, Germany used to produce under Scholz the graphs that pointed Germany giving most aid, although a lot of it was humanitarian aid or whatever, which is great, but didn't actually help the battle and stop the problems with victims, civilian infrastructure damage, and civilians being killed. Whereas the UK has been giving a lot of aid, particularly with intelligence, and I'm talking about the intelligence of people like Tony Radakin, but also we have been giving incredible amounts of training, and you see it occasionally. You see, oh, they're still being trained, are they? When people are graduating from their courses, the Ministry of Defence page in the UK gives examples and makes posts now and again, but you forget that it's an ongoing thing. We are almost permanently training Ukraine troops, and other countries are as well. That was made of the pilot training. UK didn't give planes. It was deemed to not be worthwhile enough because the differences between some of the others that were available to be exchanged and given to Ukraine, so the F-16s, and then the Mirage was the best option, but we have helped in huge numbers of other ways. And that's despite having, for those again not aware, not in Britain, a change of government that has gone from the centre right to the centre left, and the support has remained constant through the UK, which shows the depth of feeling in the UK, which is hugely in favour of Ukraine and supporting democracy and a sovereign ally, and against Russia, which is neither of those things, and has pretty much sworn in its own way to dismantle our way of living.
Well said. JR just reminded me, he sent me a Dutch piece the other day. It's mainly drawing from Kiel Institute. So this is in Dutch here. It won't translate the images. So this is before 2025, the amount of aid given to Ukraine. And you can see it's like 50-50 Europe, the US. So, and then since January 2025, it's like 99%. Europe. And then this is an interesting one. So aid given in millions of euros right throughout the war, and you can see the UK there just above Germany. I don't know how exactly this is split down because there are lots of different types of aid, but also you need to understand as a percentage of GDP per capita, all sorts of different things. Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden, so this kind of Northern Europe, they are really helping an awful lot. So who can take the lead? Well, Poland, Germany, and the UK and maybe France. I mean, they're your big four. You're kind of Weimar Triangle plus type. Yeah, I don't know what more to add to that.
Poland spends a huge amount on defence, and a lot of that is specifically or non-specific, but in a way of helping NATO, helping Ukraine as well.
Their expenditure has been huge, yeah.
They weren't mentioned there, and the Baltic states for their she's talked about income per person per capita, huge investment as well, and it is those nations that are closest. And we've seen a real uptick from Denmark and Sweden as well. Sweden in particular, obviously very near Russia as well. So the proximity to Russia has got through into people's minds in the public of just how much more at threat they are. And it's that hasn't yet reached the US, hasn't really reached France, Germany, or the UK yet, but the public understanding is pretty high. But in the US, they just feel like an island, huge island on the other side of the world, and Russia can't touch them. And one could draw comparisons with the feelings before Pearl Harbor and how that shocked the US out of their complacency and changed the course of the war. Whether it takes something similar again to happen this time before the Third World War is stopped, hopefully before it begins, or whether we're even further down that track remains to be seen. But it's by and large, the closer you are to Russia, the more you spend on defense, on anti-Russian measures.
Financial Times did a piece on that, looking at the correlation between distance from Moscow and the amount of aid to Ukraine and the amount of defense expenditure, I think. So it's interesting. So just a final bit here, pertinent to the aid halting from the US. So this is coming from, I don't know, it looks like an NBC piece there, but I can't confirm that. It was the third time Pete Hegseth on his own has stopped shipments of aid to Ukraine. So this goes back to the idea that Hegseth is making decisions that Trump has nothing to do with. The sources said. So the two previous cases in February, that was that one where they stopped intelligence and aid just when Kursk was going south, quite literally. And then another time in May. Both times his actions were reversed days later. There's still a good chance that the aid will find its way to Ukraine. So let's hope it does get reversed. I mean, it's not a massive amount of aid like the list that was given, but if that's indicative of further aid that would then be on the way, that I think that was the stuff that was just in Poland. Like, this is a problem that needs to be reversed. And if it's Pete Hegseth being a class A twat, like, then that needs to. I mean, he is just obscenely underqualified for the job. But Trump needs to come true to his word at the NATO summit, and hopefully to Zelensky. Anyway, I
won't hold your breath, Jonathan, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But get on Fox News and see if you can become a pundit, and then you might become defense secretary somewhere. That's the best route.
I would have some kind of aneurysm within like 20 minutes. I would have shouted myself to an early grave. But yes. Well, look, thank you very much to the people who have supported this conversation, the thread, all of your kind support, and thank you very much to people who have kept the live chat alive. Really appreciate you.
Jonathan. It's been a few provocateurs in there, I think, today. It's been a bit spiky.
Well, I think the mods have probably done their job. Occasionally happens. But thank you to everyone. Please like, subscribe, and share, and do all that kind of stuff. And very importantly, go and follow Tim on preferably Blue Sky, but also Twitter if you don't Blue Sky, and help him out. He funds himself through buy me a coffee type thing, or Ko-fi as it is known. And if you can help him out in that way, then that's absolutely superb. Find him here, Tim White, or TWMC Limited, as you can see on the screen at the moment, on both Twitter and Blue Sky, and check out his daily threads that are very, very cool. And if you can, sorry, before I let you have all the final words, Benny Pie is just about to put my geopolitics video, which is a good hour long, so I do warn you, that is going to go up as a live after this as a premiere. I've already recorded it. I've got to go off and see my family, but you can join in the chat there because it'll be live premiere, and then there will be a live chat alongside it. So Benny, if you want to put that in for like 5 minutes time, that'd be fantastic. Sorry, it's such short notice. So Tim, thank you. What last sort of words do you have to say or want to say?
As I said, it's July the 4th. It is Independence Day. Changes happen. We get good presidents, we get bad presidents. I got a lot of flack this morning for saying that I love America and I love the American people. I think this is a blip. It's the second blip that I didn't want to see happen. But I think there are more good people than bad people in the world, and it's up to the good people to unite, to stand up, to do what they can, to not be silent when it's safe, to not be silent, or when things get too bad that we have far more to gain than to lose. It's difficult to show courage, but I want everyone watching now to not only continue the courage that they are showing, because they are doing, just by being involved in a conflict that some see as being in a faraway land, because it is getting nearer to us and will continue to encroach geographically and in terms of our lifestyles. So what can we do? We can make sure that we talk to people and stress the need for them to become interested, to stress the need for them to become active themselves in at least following, listening to streams like this on Jonathan's excellent channel, on the social media that we've talked about, to carry the good fight forward in a way that doesn't involve arms, that just involves supporting people who do jobs like this, to support Jonathan's stream. You know, we've got servers to pay for, we've got a lot of things to pay for, trips to finance, and also, if you can, support reputable. And if you don't know who to support in Ukraine, then you can ask JP, you can ask me, and I'm sure you can find it online. But don't be taken in by scammers. There are a lot of horrible people out there. Excuse me. So happy Independence Day to Americans. I'm still proud of you as a nation, and I know that things will turn around. Elections next year. And for everyone else, thanks to all the regulars who've come and joined today, and thanks for all your kind words in the chat. They have been seen. And keep the faith. Slava Ukraini. There are people dying for us, dying for their country, and dying for democracy. It's our duty to support them in any way we can. Even if you have no money, it doesn't matter. Just keep reposting, retweeting, supporting, putting likes on, saying kind words. It means the world to me, and I'm sure it does to Jonathan as well, to know that people are understanding and trying their best in every aspect of life. Thank you for listening to my ramble and my soliloquy, and wish you a good rest of the day wherever you are.
And yeah, thanks for that, Tim. And just to remind people that the Car for Ukraine, that our campaign that we have just been doing, we have fundraised for an entire vehicle. I'm going to thank people for that. So that's happened. And then we're moving on to a Jiggers Poor campaign that JR has been sorting out on my behalf. So that's fantastic. I'll let you know soon about that. And just to let you know that the premiere starts in the countdown starts in 4:45. I don't know, that's about 3 to 8 minutes from now. So if you stay on, I don't understand how these things work, but apparently I think if you're watching this now, you'll be moved over to watching the next video.
Anywhere, go out the room, yeah. Get yourself a snack, put the kettle on, come back, and hopefully it'll switch over automatically.
Absolutely. There's a 5-minute countdown. Ben sorts these things out. I don't have a freaking clue. I'm a Luddite. I'm surprised I'm able to get my microphone working. Look, Tim, thanks. Let's do this again sometime. We won't leave it so long. Always a pleasure talking to you, mate.
Thanks to everyone. Thanks especially to Jonathan. Great work you're doing.
Okay, and you, mate. And you. Stay on a line, though. In the meantime, as Tim said, Slava Ukraini. Take care, everybody.